أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على المصطفى محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم واللعنة دائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. In our last lesson we were speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we mentioned two proofs why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must be indivisible. Why Allah is indivisible, meaning He's not composed of parts and cannot be divided in any way or form. So Allah Azza wa Jal is what we call in Arabic Ahad. One of the meanings of Ahad, as Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam explains in one of his narrations or sermons, is the one who cannot be divided in the outer world, nor through the intellect, nor through imagination. So Al-Ahad is the one who is completely simple. Okay? Simple in what sense? In the sense that he's indivisible, not composed of any parts or any components. So we mentioned two proofs, two logical proofs, confirming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ahad. Allah Azza wa Jal is indivisible, absolutely indivisible. And then we went into we looked at the traits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we said that understanding this issue of ahadiyya, the concept of ahadiyya, leads a person to understand or to understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is perfect. Allah Azza wa Jal cannot hold any forms of incompletion. Why? What's the relationship? We said briefly, we said that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is indivisible, He's not composed of any parts, that means His traits are His own essence. And this is one of the main Shia Tawheedi beliefs, one of the main Shia beliefs pertaining to monotheism, all right? To believing in God. We say, صفاته عين ذاته. Allah's attributes, Allah's traits are His own essence. And we spoke about that many times in the previous classes, this year and in the previous years. So again, for those who weren't attending, you can review the lectures, you can listen to the lectures online, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So His traits, His attributes are His own essence. His essence is His life. His life is His power. His power is His knowledge. His knowledge is His essence. Jayyid? Not to say that He doesn't have other traits. He does. But I was just giving a few examples of the traits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala holds. So now, if we understand this issue, we'll understand that Allah ta'ala cannot hold any form of incompletion, any form of imperfection. So the concept of ahadiyya takes us where? Takes us to kamalillah, takes us to Allah's perfection. It helps us understand that Allah Azza wa Jal is absolutely perfect from all angles. See, the reason we're saying so is creations have the habit of comparing the Creator to who? To our own selves. We have the habit of comparing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Creator, to al-makhluk, to the creation. And that's a big mistake. That leads people to incorrect beliefs. And if you look carefully at many incorrect beliefs that certain humans held or hold today, you'll find that one of the main reasons why they have these beliefs is They compare Allah to who? To us, or they compare us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's a major mistake. When I look at myself, when I look at the human being, the fallible human being, I might find certain forms of completion held by that human, and at the same time, I might find certain forms of incompletion, of imperfection held by the same human. For example, you'll have someone who is smart, but that same person who's smart is weak. جيد? He's physically weak. Or you'll have someone who's physically strong, very strong, but he's not too smart. Or you'll have someone who's smart, he's intelligent, he's knowledgeable, and he's also very strong, but he's stingy. جيد? So he has certain forms of completion, but he also has what? نقائص. He also has certain forms of imperfections. واضح? So one might think that the same applies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that's not the case. Allah Jalla Jalaluh is perfect from all angles. He's absolutely perfect. He has no imperfections. And the concept of ahadiyya leads us to believing in this, because if you remember, we said, if Allah held a drop of imperfection, that would make him what? It would make him absolutely not perfect. So it would make him absolute imperfection. One would say, why? Because we said his essence is his own traits. There's no difference. So if there's a drop of imperfection, just a drop, جيد, it makes him what? Absolutely imperfect. And in that case, he cannot be what we call in philosophy, wajib al-wujud. He cannot be the necessary being. واضح? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referred to, or is called in the science of philosophy, wajib al-wujud, the necessary being. جيد? So when a person has a good understanding of what wajib al-wujud means, the necessary being means, understand that if if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God forbid, was absolutely imperfect, then he cannot be what? He cannot be the necessary being. واضح? He cannot be the necessary being. So that would contradict our first point. What point is this? The point or the proof that confirms the presence of a necessary being. جيد? When we're talking about God, the first issue that we look into is the existence of God. We prove that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. Once that's proven through logic, you know that there is a necessary being. There is a wajib wujud. Right? Now we go into what his traits to discover what he is. Last week we said, or actually the week before, that based on logic, the necessary being cannot be composed of parts, cannot be indivisible. And that means he must be his own traits, which leads us to what? Understanding that he has to be perfect. Because, as we said a few minutes ago, if he had a drop of imperfection, that would make him what? Absolute imperfection. Hence, he cannot be the necessary being. جيد? طيب. One will tell me, what does this have to do with قل هو الله أحد? Right? Yani you've been talking for a few classes about Allah's attributes, Allah's essence, so on and so forth. Ya akhi, get to the point. We're saying, one of the meanings of قل هو الله أحد, one of the meanings of ahad, is that Allah is indivisible, that He's not composed of parts. So when He says قل هو الله أحد, say He is Allah and He is ahad, Allah Azza wa Jal is not only telling you that I'm indivisible, He's taking you to another level of understanding. He's telling you I'm perfect. Because once you understand what ahadiyya means, you'll understand that he has to be absolutely perfect. So the verse قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ itself confirms all forms of completion for who? For Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. Which means the verse, not the whole chapter. The whole chapter is beyond amazing. But the first verse, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, that verse in itself is also mind-blowing, subhanallah. جيد? طيب. Now we go into the narrations. After saying this, we'll look into one of the narrations of Imam Al-Baqir salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, which you can find in the book At-Tawheed for Shaykh al-Saduq. Fadal Habibi. Yeah.
Fully imperfect, or only that certain trait?
It makes him fully imperfect because he has his own traits, and there are no components that make up God. So then he becomes what? If there's a drop of imperfection, he becomes imperfection. Hence, he becomes imperfect from all angles. واضح? So if the necessary being held just a drop of imperfection, whatever that imperfection may be, let it be stinginess, let it be ignorance, weakness, you name it, whatever it may be, it will give him all other forms of incompletion, all other forms of imperfection. In better terms, instead of him being absolute perfection, instead of him being absolute perfection, he'll become absolute imperfection. واضح؟
I had a question.
يا جمال حبيبي.
You mentioned that when we look at creations, we see perfection and also imperfection. Does this also,
Yes.
this wouldn't apply to the Imam, right?
No, the Imams alayhimus salam, the Imams are perfect. Salawatullah alayhim. They're perfect human beings, perfect creations of God. But even then, they're inferior to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Imams cannot be compared to Allah because at the end of the day, they're creations of God, which makes them limited. Allah ta'ala has no limits. Allah's knowledge is unlimited. Allah's power is unlimited. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not depend on anyone. Whereas Ahlul Bayt, which are God's greatest creations, God's favorite creations, alayhimu salatu wassalam, they're dependent on God. واضح? So they're still limited. Even though they have unimaginable knowledge, and they also have great powers given to them by God, subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? They have what we call al-wilaya takwiniya, which we can talk about later, inshallah, azza wa jal. But that's given to them by who? By Allah. Which means, if Allah ta'ala wishes to remove that from Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, to remove that knowledge or that power from Ahlul Bayt, they will lose it. He'll never wish to do so, but if he does wish to do so, right, then they will lose their powers. So that's one big difference, a major difference between Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam and between Allah. They depend on God, whereas Allah ta'ala does not depend on anyone.
Okay.
واضح؟
Yes.
أحسنتم. But yes, when I was talking about, a person having one form of completion and one form of incompletion, I was referring to fallible human beings, which is the case. Most fallible human beings, or all of them, they might hold certain forms of completion, but at the same time, they also have what? Certain forms of incompletion. Jait. So we're going to look at a narration in the book At-Tawheed, where Shaykh al-Saduq Rahmatullah alayh. Let me write the title of the book down before we continue. Ali ibn Abi Talib. Bismillah. So the book is called At-Tawheed lil Shaykh As-Saduq. It's the same Shaykh As-Saduq that we've been talking about in our previous lessons. And I believe you've realized by now that this man has written a lot of hadith books, meaning he has transmitted thousands of narrations of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam to us. So Jazahullah khayra jaza'il muhsinin. He has التوحيد, he has عيون أخبار الرضا, he has من لا يحضره الفقيه, المواعظ, فضائل الأشهر الثلاثة, and also other important narrational books. جيد? That's Shaykh al-Saduq. So التوحيد, Tawheed is a book containing what? Containing narrations speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about his traits and about his oneness. It's a masterpiece. So I would recommend all of you to look into it, okay? And if you can read it from cover to cover, that would be amazing. But bear in mind, some narrations in At-Tawheed are very straightforward, very, understandable, as in the average reader can read the narration and understand it. But there are also deep narrations in At-Tawheed that need what? That need a teacher or a mentor. You're going to need a scholar or a Hausa student to explain them for you, okay? So bear in mind that if you read At-Tawheed, Tawheed al-Shaykh al-Saduq, you will go through narrations that you might not understand at first glance, okay? If you don't understand them, that's fine. Refer to a scholar or a Hausa student who's experienced, obviously, and inshallah, you'll be able to understand the narration. All right. So I'm going to share the narration with the students online. For those of you who are here, you can find the book Tawheed on on the internet. So in that book, there's a chapter about Suratul Ikhlas, where Shaykh al-Saduq mentions a narration by Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, who cites his father. So he quotes his father. Imam al-Sadiq mentions what Imam al-Baqir said, salamullah alayhi, and then Imam al-Baqir explains Surat al-Ikhlas. Now, we've already read a big chunk of the first narration that Shaykh al-Saduq mentions, so I'm going to continue where we left off, okay? Now, at a certain point, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam explains the meaning of Allah. Because Allah says what? He says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Now, if you haven't read or heard the narration, read it. Because Imam al-Baqir explains every word. قُلْ means what? It means say. Sure, it means say. But look at what he says, alayhi salam. He gives you a deeper understanding of the word قُلْ. Why does Allah say huwa, not ana? قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Why doesn't he say قُلْ أَنَا اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ? There's a reason why he said huwa, which is the pronoun for the third person pronoun, what we call in Arabic ضمير الغائب. There's a reason, and we mentioned that last year. So we got to the point where Imam al-Baqir explains the meaning of Allah. Allah. Now, Allah is what? What's Allah? No, I mean like the word Allah. The name of God, right? The name of God. God in Arabic means what? Ilah, bravo. Lord means what? Rabb, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to himself in Al-Quran Al-Kareem as what? As Al-Ilah. Sometimes he calls himself God, Al-Ilah. For example, he says, وَإِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ. Your God, alaykum salam. Your God is what? One God. He says it. Sometimes he refers to himself as Ar-Rabb, the Lord. For example, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise belongs to Allah. Who is Allah? The Lord of the worlds. Rabbil Alameen. Jayt. Or sometimes he says Rabbukum, your Lord, right? But what's interesting is the Quran al-Kareem and the narrations of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam highly emphasize on the name Allah. There's a lot of emphasis, a lot of light is shed on that name. Although Allah has other names, right? He has other names. Like what? Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, Al-Malik, Al-Quddus, Al-Aziz, Al-Hakim, Al-Salam, Al-Mu'min, Al-Muhaymin, right? But there's something unique about this one, about Allah. Hence Allah Azza wa Jal sheds a lot of light on it. يعني مثلا open the Quran, open it to any page, جيد, and you'll realize that the name Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned a lot of times, or is mentioned a significant amount of times when you look into any chapter of Al-Quran Al-Kareem, جيد, or when you look into, in better terms, when you look into most parts, to be more precise, most parts of Al-Quran Al-Kareem, right? So Imam al-Baqir explains the meaning of Allah. He says, Allahu ma'nahu al-ma'bud الذي أله الخلق عن درك ماهيته والإحاطة بكيفيته. So firstly he says, this is part of the first hadith, but it's not in the beginning because we already read the beginning last year. So he says, Allahu ma'nahu al-ma'bud. Allah means what? The one who's worshipped, al-ma'bud, the one who's worshipped. الذي أله الخلق عن درك ماهيته. Who is this being that is worshipped? The Imam continues to explain. He says, the one that the creations are unable to fully comprehend. So when we're talking about this being that's worshipped, we're talking about a being that's so excellent, so fabulous, so perfect, that the creations are what? Unable to fully comprehend. Can we get to a point where we fully understand Allah Azza wa Jal? Can't. You can understand Allah to your own level, but can you fully understand Allah's reality? As in, can you know what is Allah Azza wa Jal? You can't. You can't. واضح? Hence, Sayyidah Zahra alayha salat was salam, in her Fadakiyya sermon, she said a beautiful word, which we've explained before. She said, الممتنع من الأبصار رؤيته. Allah is the one that cannot be seen with the eyes. Why can't he be seen by the eyes? Is it because he's hiding somewhere? Sometimes I can't see you and you can't see me because I'm hiding or you're hiding. Is that the case with God? Is he hiding over مثلا العرش, the throne? That's why we can't see him? It's not. صح? So why can't we see him? أحسنت. So we can't see him because he doesn't have a form. He's not physical, right? These eyes can see what's physical. Allah Ta'ala is not physical, so he can't be seen. Simple as that. He's the creator of matter, the creator of physical beings, but he himself is not physical. So how can my physical eyes see him? Fadlallah, Hussein. Definitely that's also a reason. Since he is the creator, the creator must be too perfect to be sensed by the five senses. All right? And we're going to get to that, inshallah. Imam Bakr will talk about the senses in a bit. Salamullah alayh. So, Zahra says what? Al-mumtana' min al-absari ru'yatuh. He is the one that the eyes cannot see. Then she says, وَمِنَ الْأَلْسُنِ صِفَتُهُ. وَمِنَ الْأَلْسُنِ صِفَتُهُ. Let's write her statement down, and then we'll continue with the lesson. So she says, alayha salam, al-mumtana'. This marker is almost done. La ilaha illallah. Khair. Al-mumtana'. Can you guys see my writing or no? Can you see it? No? Al-mumtana' min al-absari ru'yatuh. You guys can't see it, right? Can you see it? Your vision's bad? That works? Yeah? Thank you. Here. Okay, yeah, this one's much better. Thank you. Yeah, Amira. So she says, alayha salam, al-mumtana' min al-absari ru'yatuh. This is part of the Fadakiyya sermon. وَمِنَ الْأَلْسُنِ صِفَتُهُ. وَمِنَ الْأَلْسُنِ صِفَتُهُ. So we explained the first part, al-mumtana' min al-absar ru'yatuh. But when she says وَمِنَ الْأَلْسُنِ صِفَتُهُ, what is she saying? She's saying, salawatullahi alayha, that the tongues cannot describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The tongues cannot describe God, which is quite surprising because she's describing him. And Allah, Ahl al-Bayt have described Allah in a lot of their sermons or narrations, alayhimus salam. So what does she mean when she says he cannot be described by the tongues? Fadl Abdullah. Mm-hmm. 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 Mahdi. Words aren't enough to describe him, right? Jayyid. So what she means to say, alayha salam, is that yes, Ahlul Bayt have described Allah Azza wa Jal with their tongues, alayhimus salam. But whatever you understand from their description of Allah is inferior to Allah's reality. So any description that's given about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not enable you to fully comprehend God. So whatever you understand of Allah right now, whatever we understand of Allah right now, inferior to his reality. Thus, there's a lot of emphasis in our narrations to do takbir. Allahu Akbar, right? Allahu Akbar means what? Yes? God is the greatest. When we say Akbar, what's the more precise translation? God is greater. Greater than what? Not bad. But Imam al-Sadiq has a specific tafsir. Yes. You're very close. Greater than to be described. So he's kind of repeating what Sayyidah Fatima said here when she said, وَمِنَ الْأَلْسُنِ صِفَتُهُ. He's greater than to be described. Again, meaning that any description you give about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not enable you to fully comprehend God. So the reality of God will be greater than what you understand from that description. واضح? So now we go back to Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. Imam al-Baqir, when he's explaining the meaning of Allah, he says, Allahu ma'nahu al-ma'bud الذي أله الخلق عن درك ماهيته. So he is the one, the being that's worshipped, the one that the creations are unable to fully comprehend. And then he says, وَالْإِحَاطَةِ بِكَيْفِيَّتِهِ. وَالْإِحَاطَةِ بِكَيْفِيَّتِهِ means what? It means that the creations are unable to understand how Allah is Allah, or how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala possessed his traits. Again, we said his traits are his own essence. Why are they unable to understand these issues? Because the word how does not apply to God. The word how, when you use this word, you use it for at least two reasons, and we will explain those reasons in a bit, inshallah. That word applies to the creations, but it doesn't apply to the creator. He is the creator of the how and whatever relates to it. To help you understand this issue, which might be somewhat vague, think about space. Many people might ask, where is Allah? Ayn Allah? Ayn. Ayn means what? Where? Jayid? That question, is it right or wrong? Why is it wrong? Okay. And? خوش. Okay. Sayyid Ali. Okay. Mahdi and then Abdullah. Uh-huh. But he cannot be limited to a finite space. صح? Good job. Abdullah. It means he's limited. If he's confined to a specific space or a specific time, it means he's limited. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. Good. So the question, Ayn Allah, where is Allah, is wrong. It doesn't apply to God. It only applies to the creation. You can only say Ayna hadha al-makhluq, for example. But you can't say Ayna al-khaliq, because Allah is the one who created time and space. So that means he's not confined in a specific time or in a specific space. I like to say, and I'm speaking figuratively, he's outside the box, not inside. Right? And I'm speaking figuratively. Jayid, because Allah Ta'ala is not physical to actually say that he's outside somewhere. Makes sense? So he's the creator of time and space, so he's not in it. So how could you say Ayn Allah? The question is wrong. The question is wrong. Some might tell me, but what about the dua known as dua al-hazin? when we say أناجيك يا موجودا في كل مكان, right? We say أناجيك, I call you in a whispering voice or in a secretive manner, O he who is present in all places. يا موجودا في كل مكان. What about that? We said previously, Allah Ta'ala is everywhere, but not in a physical manner. So is he in the library right now? Physically, no, he's not. Is he in the houses of the students watching this lesson? Physically, no, he's not. Jayid, he's not physically there. But at the same time, he is there. He's in the library. He's in China. He's in Canada. He's in the first sky, second sky, third sky, so on and so forth. He's everywhere, subhanahu wa ta'ala. But again, not in a physical sense. So how can we understand this issue that Allah Ta'ala is everywhere? We said, wherever you may be, Allah knows about you. Wherever you may be, Allah has dominion over you. صح? Yani you're in Allah's grasp. Right now, if Allah Ta'ala, if Allah wants, He can end our lives. صح? And if He wants, He can prolong our lives. Correct? If He wants, He can, cause our lungs to stop functioning. Correct? And if He wants, He can refrain from doing so. So wherever you may be, you're in Allah's grasp. Allah knows about you. Allah sees you. Allah hears you. Thus we say He is what? Everywhere. In that sense. Khosh? So when the Imam says, وَالْإِحَاطَ بِكَيْفِيَّتِهِ, the Imam al-Baqir is telling us, listen, O people, the word kayf, kayfa, how, does not apply to God. So don't even try to understand how Allah is Allah, or how Allah possessed His traits, because the question itself is wrong. It will only confuse you. Clear? Yes? Right. Now we'll go into the how. What does the question how actually mean? When I say how, or ask how, what am I looking for exactly? There are at least two meanings, okay? Or in better terms, two things that we're asking about when we use the word how. Okay? Let's write those down, and then we'll understand why the word how cannot apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya Rabb al-Alameen. So now we're looking at the word how, which is kayfa in Arabic. Kayf. So when we're using this word kayf or how in Arabic or English, usually we're asking about one of two. One of two. Okay? Number one, a person will ask about the process through which something took place. Something took place. For example, I tell you, how did you reach that level of knowledge? Suppose you're, you are a master, you have a master's in mathematics. Okay? So you tell me, well, first of all, I went through elementary school, then high school, then I went to university. I got my degree in this university, then I went to study my master's. You explain the process. So When I asked you, how did you reach that level of knowledge? I was asking you about the process that you went through to get to that level of knowledge. Okay? So number one, the word kayf, the word how, is used to know the process through which something took place. Someone will tell me, how did Allah Azza wa Jal become Allah? I tell him, your question is wrong. You want to know the process? There was no process. Azza wa Jal is Allah. He was, is, and will always be Allah Azza wa Jal. Absolute perfection. He did not go through a process to become God Azza wa Jal. Going through a process to reach a specific stage of completion applies to us creations, not to the Creator. Tosh? So just as he had no beginning, this is a word that Sayyid Abdullah Shubbar rahmatullah alayhi said in his book Haqq al-Yaqeen. Just as he had no beginning, his traits as well had no beginning. We said he is his own traits. Sah? So his knowledge has no beginning. His power has no beginning. His life has no beginning. So to ask about the process through which Allah became Allah is wrong. The question is flawed. Make sense? So this is one thing we'll look for or ask about when we use the word how, the word kayfa. The other issue or thing is when we use kayfa or how, we're asking about someone's state. So you're trying to look for the state or to know about the state of a particular being. For example, I tell you, how are you? Jayyid, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Are you, for example, sick or healthy? I'm asking about your state. Are you angry or pleased? Are you weak or strong? Are you feeling sad or not? So I'm asking about your state. Jayyid? Asking about the state of the creation is fine, because the creation does go through different states. Even Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam, the greatest creations of God, God's favorite, salamullahi alayhim, they went through different states. Some days the Imams would be happy. Some days the Imams would be sad. Jayyid? Tomorrow, for example, the 11th of Sha'ban, one of my favorite days, is a day of happiness for Imam Hussain alayhi salam, because Allah gives him who on that day? Ali al-Akbar, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. Jayyid? So tomorrow is the day of Abi Abdullah's happiness, salawatullah alayhima. But the day of Ashura was what? The day of Abi Abdullah's sadness, sorrow, crying. The day his heart was torn into 1,000 pieces, salamullah alayhi. Sah? So the Imams go through different states. One day the Imam is healthy, one day the Imam is sick. For example, Imam al-Hadi, salamullah alayhi, one day fell sick, and he told his Shi'as, imagine this, he told them to go to Al-Ha'ir, meaning to go to Karbala, to the grave of Imam al-Hussain salam, and to pray for him there. To pray for him beside the grave of his grandfather, al-Hussain. Now, some Shi'as were confused. What is this? He's telling us to pray for him beside the Ha'ir. He's the Imam, alayhi salam, right? He is, one of them said, he is like the person who is buried in Al-Ha'ir, meaning he's like Imam al-Hussain, he's the inheritor of Imam al-Hussain, salamullah alayhi, and he wants us to pray for him. So the Imam said that there are places in this world where Allah Azza wa Jal loves to be worshipped, and Al-Ha'ir is one of those places. So the site that contains the grave of Imam al-Hussain, salawatullah wa salamu alayh, is one of those places where Allah loves to be worshipped. Basically, Imam al-Hadi wanted to notify them that Al-Ha'ir al-Husayni is a very important place. So I, your Imam, tell you to go pray for me beside Al-Ha'ir or inside Al-Ha'ir. So now, if this is clear, we'll understand why you can't use the word how to ask about Allah. What do you want to ask about? His state? Allah Ta'ala does not go through different states. Make sense? He doesn't go through different states. Me and you, we have emotions. We have feelings. Allah has no feelings. Really, Allah has no feelings, yes. If he had feelings, that would be a form of weakness for God. Jayyid? Yes, feelings for us human beings is a form of what? A form of perfection. It leads us to our perfection. But for God, if he had feelings, it would be what? It would be a form of imperfection, a form of weakness. Yes.
You want to seek the pleasure of Allah, let's say by giving charity.
Yeah.
Right? Like by seeking his pleasure, like exactly.
Hassan, that's a very good question. So, seeking his pleasure, the pleasure of God means his rewards. Yeah. His pleasure is his reward. What about his anger? What does that mean? His punishment. Jayyid? Allah himself does not go through emotions, does not go through feelings. If that was the case, if Allah had feelings, you know, a lot of people would have been annihilated by now. Jayyid? You could imagine if Allah Ta'ala, for example, feels anger like us, he would have annihilated many people on the spot, but he's not like us. He's super strong, infinitely strong, Jayyid. So he can, watch people sin and disbelieve in him, yet he'll still give them time to fix their mistakes. He doesn't fear giving them time. Fadal Sayyid Ali.
Or no. Yeah.
So he was angry at them for sure. He was angry at the people of Lut alayhi salam, hence he destroyed them, right? He wiped them out. And the only family that was saved was the family of Lut. And when I say family of Lut, I mean Lut and his daughters, period. Not even his wife was spared because she was aiding the homosexuals, right? And Lut and his daughters were spared. They were saved because they were, righteous. They were pious people. Salamu alayhim. So was Allah angry at the people of Lut? Yes, of course. But when we say he was angry, we don't mean that he felt anger. He doesn't feel. He's the creator of feelings. So feelings don't apply to him. He knows what a feeling is. He created it, right? He knows what you go through when you feel things, when you feel sad, happy, angry, mad, etc. But it doesn't apply to him. It's like space, time and space. He knows what time is. He knows what space is. He's the creator of time and space, but he's not in it. It doesn't apply to him. واضح? Yes. So was he angry at the people of Lut? Yes. Him being angry at the people of Lut means what? It means that they deserved his punishment, and ultimately they were led to his punishment. They received the worldly punishment, which would be succeeded by what? The punishment of the hereafter. جيد؟ تمام. So Allah Ta'ala has no state. He doesn't go through feelings like we go through feelings. واضح? Okay? Hence, you can't say, how is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The question is flawed. The question is wrong. Have a question? Go ahead. it's wrong and it's illogical. It's illogical. And obviously, if you're going to believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a state, like he goes through states like us, and he's sometimes sick, he's sometimes healthy, sometimes he's actually feeling happy, sometimes he's actually feeling sad, then that's a form of disbelief. واضح? Yes. عفوا? Almost. So, going back to the definition of Imam al-Baqir, he says, alayhi salam, Allahu ma'nahu al-ma'bud. Allah means what? The being that is worshipped. الذي أله الخلق عن درك ماهيته. That being is a being that the creations are unable to fully comprehend. والإحاطة بكيفيته. We explained what he means by إحاطة بكيفيته and how it indicates that the word how does not apply to God subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you cannot know how Allah was Allah or how Allah Azza wa Jal held his traits because the question itself is flawed. Makes sense? The question itself is flawed. The how does not apply to God. He's the creator of the how. واضح? So Allah Ta'ala has no states that he goes through. And at the same time, he doesn't go through a process. And because of that process, he acquires certain levels of perfection or forms of perfection. That doesn't apply to God subhanahu wa ta'ala. Last but not least, before we take a break, realize how Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam said, Aliha. Aliha al-khalqu an darki mahiyatih. Aliha means what? Aliha, as we will mention next week, as we continue the narration, it means a person became confused. Aliha, again, means someone went through a state of confusion. واضح? So now, what's Imam al-Baqir telling us alayhi salam when he says, الذي أله الخلق عن درك ماهيته والإحاطة بكيفيته? Al-Baqir alayhi salam is telling us that if you try to fully comprehend Allah Azza wa Jal, you will not achieve your goal and you will only confuse yourself. You'll only dwell in confusion, which is the reality. Sometimes our minds start thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We find ourselves, thinking about his reality, and what do we feel? We feel confusion. You're going to feel confusion. You're going to feel puzzled because you cannot fully comprehend your own creator. You don't have the capacity to comprehend him fully. جيد? Next week, inshallah, we'll continue. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على المصطفى محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وسلم.